Yeah, Palingana. Hello and welcome to the University of Tasmania's Island of Ideas public lecture series held in partnership with Agriculture. Today we're meeting on Lutruwita, Tasmania, Aboriginal land, sea and waterways. I acknowledge with deep respect the owners of this land, the Palawa people on which we meet today. The Palawa people belong to the oldest continuing culture on this world, on this earth. They cared and protected the country for thousands of years. They knew this land, they lived on this land, not necessarily this exact land, and I honour them. For many years, the Palawa people referred to this land as Palinwina Larina Kanamaluka, meaning the town near the River Tamar. And in fact, we are only a couple of hundred metres from the confluence of Lakakeller and Plipatumala, which are the north and south west rivers respectively, where they join to form Kanamaluka. I acknowledge that it is a privilege to stand on country and to walk in the footsteps of those before us, along the riverbanks, along the gums and the seas that continue to run through the veins of the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to the many Aboriginal people that did not make elder status, and to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community today that continue to care for country. I recognise a history of truth which acknowledges the impacts of invasion and colonisation upon Aboriginal people, resulting in the forcible removal of their lands. Our island is deeply unique with spectacular landscapes, with our cities and towns surrounded by bushland, wilderness, mountain ranges and beaches. I stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language and history. And I continue a continued effort to fight for Aboriginal justice and the rights, paving the way for a very strong future. Excuse me while I just play around with my notes here. So if you're joining us tonight online, please feel free to share your acknowledgements by typing into the Q&A function, which is located in the bottom of your window. I'm Professor Dom Geraghty. I've got the very long-winded title of Pro-Vice Chancellor Launceston, which means that I'm the academic lead for the northern campuses up here in Launceston, and basically assisted probably about 300 or 400 people in working on the development of these beautiful buildings and the refurbishment of the buildings here as well. I think I'm okay to MC because I've spent the last 32 years of my life trying to spice it up, literally, in that my research area is the active ingredients of hot chili peppers. So, as I said, welcome to the University of Tasmania, Island of Ideas. And on behalf of the university, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you all tonight. In this era of unprecedented challenges and opportunity, we find ourselves at the forefront of a crucial mission. With the world population estimated to reach 10 billion by 2050, the urgent need to address the growing demand in food production cannot be underestimated or understated. Our world faces the need to address the growing demand for food production while preserving land and waterways and preparing for climate-related threats, noting that we're on a floodplain here. But how does a food bowl like Tasmania feed a growing population while maintaining or improving Tasmania's land and water quality for future generations? How do we create food systems that not only meet the needs of today, but also mitigate climate-related threats such as fire, flood and drought? It is in this context that our speakers tonight will share their passions, research, ideas, a few jokes and experiences that offer hope and pave the way for a brighter food future. Together, these people exemplify the spirit of the University of Tasmania, a spirit that fosters collaboration, embraces diversity, embraces creativity, and drives us to explore new frontiers in the pursuit of a better future. In this pursuit of knowledge, we unite to forge a stronger connection between sciences, industry and society and community. It is this very connection that brings us all here tonight and will shape our food future, paving the way for a brighter and more sustainable existence, a future that touches the lives of every individual in Tasmania and reverberates far beyond our beautiful shores. So without any further delay, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. Now, our first speaker is interested in improving landscape function across our regions as a pathway to better environmental stewardship. Theresa Chapman is a soil scientist, currently researching the links between plant diversity and soil function in cropping systems. She is currently completing her PhD with our Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture and working as a soil carbon field officer with AgriProve. A long-time resident of Northwest Tasmania, Theresa is interested in improving landscape function across our regions and as a pathway to better environmental stewardship. Please welcome Theresa Chapman.
Thanks, Tom. I'd like to add my acknowledgement to our First Nations people. I feel super lucky to live in a land and share it with the world's oldest continuous culture. So first I want to share this little clip with you. So this is a little game that a grower group called Soil First Tasmania partook in, mostly on social media, where if you grew a very particularly lush cover crop or mixed pasture, you could run into it and see how far you could stay on your pins. And if you couldn't stay on your pins for very long, you'd grown a particularly good cover crop. So this is high-end science. You might not completely understand it. The other game we played was hiding things in your particularly lush cover crop. So if you could make certain things vanish from your farm inventory, then that was also a very calculated measure of the lushness of your cover crop. So I have been studying soil ecology for a while. I came from a straight science ecology background and then moved to Northwest Tassie, and agriculture made a lot of sense in that region. And I was lucky enough to meet Soil First Tasmania and volunteer for them for a while. And this is a really interesting group of farmers that are doing great things and like really leading Tasmanian agriculture in sustainable practice. All my images now are just a slideshow, so I will just speak in general. And these are just some of the fun images I've been taking over the last few years, working in and around diverse cover crops and pastures. So the thing I really love about a group like Soil First Tas, and there's other groups like this around the world and around Australia, is they're building a community that doesn't rely on proximity for a start. So a lot of farmers, when they want to do things a bit differently or change practice, they have a pushback from their neighbours or their parents or their cousins. You know, those kind of pushbacks are really strong. As we all know from our peers and our tight communities, it's hard to be different. But an online and a get-together community like Soil First can build the peer group that these farmers need to support them in practice change. And that's been really amazing to be a part of. Me, working from an academic lens, I'm mostly just chasing these leading farmers, right? So they're already doing it, they're already changing practice, and I intend to take their lead and support them from an academic side of things. And there is that interesting gap that can be a little hard to bridge between academia and on-farm practice. And sometimes there's even a little bit of resentment between those two groups of who's doing it and who's not doing it and who understands it and who doesn't understand it. So it's been really important to me to stay relevant to the farming community, and I've been privileged to have access to some really great farmers who've helped me every step of the way, including designing my seed mixes for my trial. So my PhD project, to give you the context, I'm running two fairly decent-sized field trials, one at the Forthside Vegetable Research Facility, which is the very red soiled photos that you can see in the slideshow, and one in Carrick, which is on a much more challenging duplex soil, and that's facilitated by Rob Dent, who's a really great seed producer in the Northern Midlands. And what I'm comparing is different levels of diversity in a cover crop. So if you're not familiar with cover crops, in between commercial crops in a cropping system, you might grow something just to keep the soil protected and covered, say over the winter in Tasmania, or in other places in Australia, it might be over the summer. And there's all sorts of ways to go about this. In Tasmania, often it's a ryegrass cover, or there's, of course, the long-held practice of doing a couple of years of a pasture lay. And most people understand that that really restores a lot of things in the soil and gives you a real break for a lot of crop diseases and can be really beneficial to the following crops. So in a cropping system, a high-intensity cropping system like in the area around Forth, you're not going to do a couple of years of pasture lay. You want to keep doing the cash crops that you can because they're so lucrative. So you basically just have a little gap in winter where you can't grow a commercial crop, and that is a good window to do a cover crop. So my project is asking, if you bump up the diversity in that cover, is that worthwhile? It's a little bit harder to manage, a little bit more expensive for the seed, but there may be some benefits that are worth exploring, and the farmers who are doing it are really enjoying it. They're getting really creative with it. And so that's where I hope to just add a little bit of scientific support to their practice that they're already doing. The theory of that, of the plant diversity and what it can do for the soil, is that a diverse plant stand is a more productive plant stand. And there's many reasons for that. There's sort of a complementarity idea that all the different plant species use slightly different resources, and so together they can be more productive because they're all accessing slightly different parts of the soil chemistry profile. There's a ecological argument where plants are designed to grow in a diverse stand. You know, none of our undisturbed ecosystems have monocultures. And there's the prairie lands of North America that everybody holds up as a sort of exemplary example of plant diversity, because they've built this incredible soil resource over the thousands of years, millions of years that they have existed. The soil fungi seems to really love plant diversity. So a diverse plant stand can grow more root biomass and encourage more fungi, and that all drives this really dynamic soil ecosystem that pumps plant exudates into the soil. And so these are carbon-based, like sticky glues and extra substances that really drive the microbiological community in the soil, which is the most biodiverse portion of our Earth's habitats. And that is a really critical pathway for soil carbon. So you probably all understand that soil carbon is important, and the source of soil carbon is atmospheric carbon, so it has a part to play in addressing the somewhat oversupply of atmospheric carbon we have at the moment that's causing some problems. So there is a theory that a really diverse plant stand will boost the soil biology, will drive that carbon cycle, and you'll get a more resilient landscape, more carbon-rich soil, more life in the soil, deeper root exploration, and all of that is kind of a positive feedback loop. So there's a lot of potential. It's really hard to find patterns and data in field work in agriculture because there's so many variables, right? So all of these things are hard to get in the science, and if you read the literature, it's generally pretty underwhelming, and I'm concerned that my thesis is going to be not a really page-turning read. But that's what we're here for. We're here to chip away at these questions and do really good science and establish little parts of the puzzle. So that's what I tell myself when I can't sleep at night. If you zoom out a little, the other part of this story is that all of our farms exist in an ecosystem, in a broader ecosystem, a landscape. And so plant diversity is really critical for all of our invertebrates, under the ground and above the ground, little birds, families, communities. We just need to keep these ecosystems intact. Bare soil can be useful if you're thinking narrowly about plant disease or getting back into the paddock early next season, those kind of things. But really, in general, my experience of who's doing this and what it feels like to be out in the fields when they have a diverse plant stand is this is a really lovely way to give back a bit to the, some people use the term agro-ecosystem, which I really like. And as Dom mentioned in the introduction, we can't be producing food at the expense of our natural systems because that is very short-sighted, and we're all resting on our natural ecosystems. And there's a term I like to bandy about, ecosystem services, that we may not think about all the time. And these are the services that are provided to us for free by the planet, such as recycling our nutrients, degrading our waste, cleaning our water, creating rain, things that we just simply can't survive without. So to me, introducing diversity wherever you can in a farming system is a critical part of stepping towards a more sustainable system. And my little tiny piece of the puzzle, I hope, will support our very incredible farmers. And one of the messages I wanted to say tonight is that our Tassie farmers are really great and they're doing everything they can and they have immense pressures on them. And you'll hear from a farmer next, who's a friend of mine. And I just think it's worth repeating that message that farmers aren't these bad people out there in the landscape wanting to use all the chemicals and take what they can from the land. I've never met a community that cares more about their place and knows more about their place. I often say that, and I think about our First Nations people, and I'm sorry if that sounds bad on that front, but farmers also know a lot about their place and care deeply about their place. And in my experience, they're doing great work, and I only hope that I can support them in my tiny way. Thank you.
Thanks, Theresa. That was lovely. By the way, just as a little comment, we've got to trying to build a little ecosystem here at Inverness. In case you hadn't noticed, we've got a community garden, and we've actually talked with all of the food providers on site to provide all of their either predominantly reusable implements or compostable. So we have an in-vessel composter at the far end of the campus, and that generates usable compost within 2 weeks or thereabouts. And that gets used on our community garden, and the leftovers get distributed to other community gardens around the area. And we also use rainwater runoff from all of the buildings here. So we are creating our own little ecosystem where we can grow, harvest, cook, and in about 12 months' time, we'll have a community kitchen inside one of our buildings as well. So it's a nice little sort of way of describing a university campus as its own little ecosystem. So thanks again, Theresa. The next speaker is Robert Arvier, and Robert Arvier is also one of our own, having graduated from the University of Tasmania, obtaining his Bachelor of Agricultural Science in 2012. He has over a decade of farm and agribusiness experience across vegetable, dairies, oilseed, and processing industries. Robert is passionate about global agricultural development and innovation, particularly the adoption of renewable energy and carbon reduction opportunities for agri-food businesses. He is the managing director of West Pine Ag, which he co-founded in 2018. This company is a new breed of agribusiness focused on high efficiency, low impact food and energy production. And I'm delighted to introduce Robert.
Thanks a lot, Dom. Look, really excited for the opportunity to come here and talk to everyone today. So thank you to you, Taz, for having me back after I'm not sure how many years. It's been a little while now. So about me, I'm not from an agricultural background, so I'm not a traditional farmer. I grew up next to a dairy farm and was convinced and told my parents from day one that that's what I was going to do. And as soon as I finished school, I jumped the fence and started my 1 a.m. starts. Getting up, getting the cows in, milking. It lasted nearly 3 months. And Dad suggested that maybe I should give uni a try before crossing it off the list. So I took myself off to Hobart and enrolled in a Bachelor of Ag. Spent 4 years there and have had an extremely rewarding career since. I've worked in agronomy for a couple of years, straight out of ag science, and then predominantly for a large European agribusiness for about 6 years after that. And extremely fortunate to have been exposed to many countries in that time, many practices, and exposed to what I would, I guess, describe as world best practice. And it's been a really, really interesting time, particularly as that food system's grown exponentially over the same period. I returned to Tassie in 2018 and started West Pine Ag with an incredible team, one of which is Hannah, who's here with us tonight, and Mark Reeves. The team's grown quickly to a group of about 12 people now, and is an incredibly diversified business. Primarily, we're in farm and project management, and we're focused on responsible production. That's our core business. For me, responsible production centres around the farm. That is absolutely the core of everything we do. I guess it's a bit of a passion project as well. It's also our most high-risk activity, and it's the one with the lowest returns out of everything we do. So we do love it, but it's a real challenge. And we've had some incredible results over the years and some incredible support too from some of the farmers that Theresa's mentioned. Being new in the industry, having that support's been critical for us to get going. So whether it's been from a science aspect, which I've been able to draw on through my own peers, or through someone over the fence who's been farming for multiple generations, without that support, there's no chance we would be still standing in the farming space today, because it's tough. It is also where it all started. But for us, we really rely on those three pillars: social, financial, and environmental. And I say them in that order intentionally. Without the people that we have in our production system, it would be impossible. So the framework I mentioned before, particularly in a high risk and low return environment, you really, really need core people that will stay around and be rewarded for their efforts, because there are huge efforts in this side of our business. Financially, without that return, we can't do any of the things we want to do and the things we're passionate about, which is responsible production and respecting the environment that we operate in. So that's been something that's been really challenging to get right for us and finding the balance. So what we've done is we've spent a lot of time and a lot of cost in investing in technology, measuring our impact, and also reducing our energy footprint as well. And that's been key to our success. We've aligned with global goals. Whilst our action is local, Tassie's small, our farm is not enormous, we believe that aligning with those global goals is really key to putting ourselves in the way of success. Now, there's no downside to future-proofing, and we just don't let perfect get in the way of good. We're really trying to, align ourselves with people like Theresa, the projects that are around us that are, demonstrating that we can do better. For our business, we quickly moved from just farming into a specialised grocery store that got slightly out of hand. We wanted to have a farm store that, was a cute little roadside place for our farm produce to be sold. We ended up buying the local grocery business through COVID, which was struggling. And that business has now grown into a substantial specialty grocery store called the Penguin Pantry, and now has food services as well. So it's been a really, really rewarding process. And it was one that was designed to get closer to the consumer, to understand exactly how we could provide value to them through that local and responsible production, rather than just ramming it down people's throats and saying you need to be buying better, spending more, buying something with a green label. What do people in our local community want? What do they value? And then how can we bring that feedback to a real farm? So that was the intention. It's working, and it's been quite a period of rapid growth for us. But also, it would be remiss to say that it hasn't been something that has provided financial stability to the farm as well by smoothing out our cash flow. A farm is 10 months of zero, 2 months of income, and an enormous overdraft. So having month-to-month cash flow as well as that voice and that connection to the consumer has also been a really practical benefit for us. I guess conversely, there's a huge amount of value in the quality that we're offering in that space and our peers in the same area as well. So we feel that having those conversations means that we're able to have some license in providing feedback to all of the suppliers, whether it's in packaging, the other producers that supply the shop, the majority of which are local producers and farmers like ourselves. But there's definitely tensions in where the value lies in our store. So being a specialty grocer, we're focused on fresh food, fresh produce, but also in our coffee shop, it's really interesting to see where price sensitivity lies, particularly as we see interest rates climb and people in our community that might be food insecure or having a challenging time economically. And what we've seen is that the feedback loop is all pushed towards fresh produce. So we don't get any negative feedback really on price movement in ready to drink, ready to eat, hot coffee. And it's where there is margin. Come back to fresh produce where we've got high amounts of waste and high amounts of input, a crop that can take 4 or 5 months to grow. That is where we're getting the pressure to say, hey, this should be cheaper. Carrots should not be this price, even if they're out of season and have been beautifully produced. So that is a tension. And also too, for us, we really want to make sure that if we're producing a high quality, responsibly sourced, locally produced commodity, that everyone can go along for the ride. So being a specialty grocer, buying locally is not the cheapest option. For us, the cheapest option would be to buy everything from the Melbourne markets, the Sydney markets, and sell exactly the same produce as Woolworths to be price competitive. But that's not what we are aiming to do. What we do want to do, though, is take everyone along for the ride. And for us in considered consumption, we see all of these conversations, particularly on the farm side. We need to get our production systems to X height by 2050. But I don't know. I think in Australia, we're really missing the boat a little bit in the food waste conversation. We're chucking out 30% of what we grow, 30% of what's in the factory. And and people are going hungry, which seems insane. And that's happening in our community as well. That's not just on the streets of Melbourne. So there's tensions. We don't have the answers. We'd love to love to hear from someone in that space. But enough of the sad stuff. What can you do? So I think for us, our message is really clear. Get curious and ask questions about everything. It's not rude. It's really interesting. So I think when you're in a local store or Woolworths, it doesn't matter. If someone can't tell you where, who, and how your produce or product was grown or produced, don't buy it if you can. So it's a number one, spend it wisely and really understand what that impact is. And educate yourself on those people that are in your community that can provide that value to you, and provide feedback. If there's some way that someone can provide you more value from a sustainability aspect, then producers absolutely want to know. Short supply chains, they're not always good. Food miles is something that gets a lot of credence in our community, but buying from a car boot can sometimes mean workers are not being paid correctly, they're not being paid super, all of that sort of thing. So then in that instance, Woolworths is a better option. So short supply chains, not always the answer. And equally too, commodities that we grow in Australia that aren't necessarily suitable are something that we should consider as well. So imports of highly efficient products aren't always bad. So the message is not you can't buy rice that's not imported, or you must buy the pumpkins from around the corner. It's just understand what went into producing it. And that has those three pillars. Are the people that produced it paid correctly? Are they, I guess, working under conditions that you would be happy working under? And what is the impact environmentally of that production as well? You can adapt your diet. This is something that's really, really challenging. I'm a beef and lamb producer, but we really need to eat less meat. It's something that is really hard, definitely for me, but it's something that we can do and something that we can challenge ourselves to start to look at. When you look at the impact of that food, everyone always turns to meat, but carrots are a part of our core production. And as Theresa knows, erosion in carrot paddocks is astonishingly bad. And that's including our farm. So it's not about whipping only meat. It's starting to look at everything, whether it's almonds, carrots, what is the broader impact of that crop. So when we go and grow 10 hectares of carrots, if 30% of that is never making it to someone's mouth, that's an enormous waste. So it's asking questions about all of those commodities. So that's the key thing, is to understand what you can do, maintain your nutrition, but aesthetics aren't important. Understand the value, the quality, and where it's grown over what it looks like. Halve your waste. I'm going to keep this brief because someone far more accomplished in this field is going to be talking about this topic. But buy what you need. If it's pre-packaged in plastic, a bag of carrots, it'll only take a couple of seconds to grab the carrots from the bulk section of the supermarket. And if you're really feeling brave, get the ones that are wonky and in a funny shape. The plastic pre-packs, there's a lot of technology coming that way, but at the moment, we're seeing in our store especially, as things come into the shop, they're still in what is called a multiple use plastic, but it's a really thick plastic that is never used again. So yes, because it's called multiple use, understand, but if it's not going to be used again, it's single use. So really, really think about that. And we need to be a lot more concerned about the production that we have in the ground. So when we harvest our broccoli, for example, this year, 10% remained behind because it didn't meet supermarket spec for size. Now, the quality of that crop is just as good as everything we harvested, but it cannot be economically harvested. We can't pay people to remove it. It's not something that can be achieved. But what can change is the supermarket spec. I don't have an answer for that one either, but it's about putting pressure on those regulations, speaking up when there's an opportunity to say, hey, we'd actually like to cut all of the broccoli and get it into people's houses, into their shops. Now, as producers, we really need to move past self-interest as well, because your average carrot farmer or broccoli farmer, it's still a profitable commodity to grow. if we suddenly start eating that 30% that's wasted, the industry is going to shrink substantially. If we start eating less meat, the industries will shrink substantially. So it's something that we all need to be part of the conversation in discussing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. That was great. At the risk of stating the obvious, I know that, you know, and I won't mention particular supermarkets or providers like that, but you buy a bag of carrots and a week later you can't use them. And about a month ago, I bought a nice big bunch of parsnips, which I love making parsnip fries. Not the healthiest, I admit, but 4 weeks later, they're still perfect. And that's because I bought them from the harvest market here. So it's a no-brainer. So the next speaker is Dr. Sam Sawyer. Samantha Sawyer is a lecturer and researcher in food science, specializing in digitization of food quality. She's a broad background in chemistry, microbiology, and sensory science with a focus on industry-facing research. But she does work on the most important food of all at the moment. It's called wine. So recently she has been on a quest to develop a simple and inexpensive system that is capable of early detection of smoke taint in vineyards, something which Australia is very, very aware of, providing winemakers with the knowledge to help them develop strategies against the impacts of climate change. Fighting the good fight for lovers of delicious wine and the Tasmanian wine industry alike, please welcome Dr. Sam Sawyer.
So, for those of you who have a glass of wine, can I get you to raise it? For those of you who don't, and for those of you online, I'd like you to imagine it. I'd like you to imagine that you've got your favorite glass of wine, or the wine that's in your glasses now from the Tamar Valley, and I'd like you to think about it and to swirl it. Imagine that you're swirling this wine and you bring it towards your mouth and your nose and you breathe in the wonderful aroma of an ashtray, of cigarettes, of burnt rubber. That's what faces the wine industry when they're lucky enough to escape a bushfire, but not the smoke itself. It's a damage that they can't see or smell or taste in the grapes. And that is a big part of the issue. So the compounds that would cause those cigarette-y and ashy aromas are produced when wood is burnt. And that travels along with the smoke out from a bushfire, and it gets taken into the grapes and bound into the sugars that are in the grapes. And as soon as they're bound, they can't be tasted and they can't be smelt. You can test it in a lab, but right then and there, the question is, well, how bad is it? And that's the thing. At that point, they don't know. To give you an idea of how big this issue is, I've got a graph here which shows the wildfires in Australia and the areas burnt over the last several decades. And you can definitely see a trend that's happening there. To give it some of the Tasmanian context, I've put in there 3 of the major bushfires here over the last decade. Got the 2013 fires in Denali, got the Northwest Coast in 2016, and you've got the Huon Valley in 2018-2019. Over on the right, what you can see is the devastating bushfires from in the 2019-2020 season. So they were the devastating bushfires that Tassie was lucky enough to mostly escape. Most of it was on the mainland. But if you were in Launceston or in the Tamar Valley at that time, what you might remember is the smoke that came across from Victoria, came over the Bass Strait, flowed into the Tamar Valley and sat there. And it was something that we could smell and we could see it. But there was no smoke taint. There was no risk. And that's part of the problem, because how we measure smoke at the moment is we can see it. We're looking at particulate matter. So you might recall that in the news lately, we've heard a lot around PM 2.5, like what was covering the Canadian wildfires and how they flowed into, or the smoke drifted into New York City. That isn't necessarily relative to the smoke taint compounds, which means that they can flow ahead of a fire, and they can drift for kilometres beforehand as well. So if you were a producer, how would you be able to assess risk? How would you know, well, how bad is it? Is it so bad that they should just get rid of their grapes? Is it something where it might be okay and they could still, they just need to change their, I'd say just, but change their processes so that they can still produce something? Or is it low enough that they can actually produce their normal product, something that they are proud of and they would want you to be able to experience? And so what we're working on at the moment is to help them understand that risk, because they know that they've got a smoky past and that it's going to get worse in the future as well, and that it does affect their livelihoods. So what we're working on is to be able to help them understand their risk profiles in the vineyard, so that, as Don mentioned, I'm on this quest. It kind of works in a lab at the moment, but we're trying to test it out in the field, which is always the interesting part, to be able to see how much of these compounds are actually, or what their risks are when we do get a smoke event. And what we're also working on is if they do get some smoke and they know that it's in their grapes, well, what can you do at that point? And so is it low enough level that they can still make a fantastic product? Because when you think about Tassie, we're a premium wine producer. We're a hero region for sparkling wine. The problem with some of these smoke taint compounds is that, like I said, with the grapes, you can't see or smell or taste it in the grapes themselves. But where it comes out and produces those ashy and smoky flavours is when the grapes are processed, when they're fermented and then aged into a wine. That's when it all comes out. And so if you can't see it at the grape stage, what are they supposed to do? And in previous years, they've had to just discard the lot if they suspected that there was smoke taint. And so what we're doing is, it's a little bit difficult to be able to put grapes within reach of a bushfire, so we're doing this artificially. So we're smoking them in tents down in Hobart in collaboration with the fire centre there. So thank you to the lovely Ghost Rock for letting me smoke their fantastic grapes, because they're really not that fantastic afterwards. And also to Swinging Gate for actually turning it into the wine. And so we're doing this in different levels so that we can help them to understand at what point can you taste it and smell it and it doesn't become a good product after maybe 1 year, 3 years and 10 years. And so we just started, so we're at time 0. So it's a bit of a watch this space over the next decade, always good fun. But basically what we want to be able to do is to help the wine industry to be more resilient. Like you would have heard from the other speakers, we're talking about producers, we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about some of the costs that's associated with sustainability and making responsible choices. This is a good example in the wine industry, and smoke taint is a good example of the impacts and the cost of the impacts of climate change. So as well as they're trying to be more responsible, be more sustainable, change a whole industry, they're also at the same time trying to mitigate the risk to their futures of climate change itself. So what I'd like you to think about is some of the technology that kind of comes along with it. And we're talking about technology, but we're talking about things like AI. We're getting more data, we're understanding more around how the sensory side, for example, with the smoke taint, the different compounds and the sensory thresholds and the profiles for that. And that can all be applied to other industries as well. And so that sort of leads me into what our next speaker is going to talk about, which is around food and sustainability.
Thanks, Sam. I genuinely believe every person in this room needs to be funding this research. It's so important. It's so important to my retirement, I'm telling you. So our final speaker, but certainly not our least, is Professor Rob Shellie. So Rob Shellie has been with the University of Tasmania since 2005. And I'm told that Robert had the pleasure of being taught by Rob during his undergraduate studies in agriculture. And although he temporarily defected to the mainland at the end of 2015, at which time he became dead to me, he is now a professor of food and nutrition at the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture. He has also worked on some innovative projects with defence. His research focuses on instrumental analysis of flavour compounds in food and beverages. The overarching aim of his research is the development of new techniques to enhance flavour analysis capabilities by discovering ways to make faster, more effective and/or more sensitive determination of flavour compounds. Please welcome to the floor our final speaker for tonight, Professor Rob Shellie.
It's interesting that the previous speakers seem to know what I'm going to say, because actually I have little idea what I'm going to say, but thanks for the couple of cues there. We'll see how we go. This is really going to be from the sublime to the ridiculous. Well, let's hope not too much. Honestly, a night like tonight reminds me that I have one of the best jobs in the world. When I see someone like Rob stand up here and talk about the career that he has forged as a University of Tasmania graduate, knowing that we spent those horrible hours in the lab back in first year chemistry where he probably disliked me immensely, but hopefully has forgiven me for that. It's really a fantastic opportunity to be able to train and enrich the thinking of the next generation of graduates to work in our food industry here in Tasmania. So the bio, I hope that hasn't put you off. Look, I wear many hats. There are 3 hats listed here, and that's probably one too many for to be telling bad Tasmanian jokes. But I am located here in the Centre for Food Innovation at the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture. I am working currently in the Department of Defence at the Defence Science and Technology Group in Scottsdale, and launched just on the 31st of July. There are 31 days in July, aren't there? Yes, just a mental check. Is a brand new venture, if you like, is the Australian Research Council Training Centre for Hyphenated Analytical Separation Technologies, or as we like to call that, high-tech. High-tech is a collaboration between University of Tasmania, Deakin University and the University of Queensland, and about a dozen different industries from within Australia and a few from around the world. And the purpose of that centre is to train industry-ready graduates. So again, I really do feel like I have one of the best jobs in the world. So hyphenated analytical separation technologies, please don't leave, because the panel will be coming back up shortly, and you can ask all of your burning questions to them. There's nothing a better conversation killer than telling people that I'm an analytical chemist. So I tend to use the term measurement scientist. I think it's a bit more friendly. And, you know, if we're having a really good conversation, maybe I'll tell people that I'm a food metrologist and make myself sound really fancy. But really, when everything boils down, food is chemistry. And for me, at least, chemistry is nourishment. And so what does Rob do? When I started my journey, if you like, in food science, I was essentially working on it was essentially an engineering project to build better instrumentation to make sensitive measurements of flavour and fragrance compounds. And that might sound really unexciting, but I think that we do a good job for all of us, and we do a good job for the world. Next time, and we still have a few cold mornings ahead of us here in Launceston. Next time there's a really cold morning and you're having an extra long hot shower, take a look at the back of your shampoo bottle and look at the ingredients that are listed on the shampoo bottle. And As you know, ingredients tend to be listed from most abundant to least abundant. And right down the bottom of there's a bunch of funny names. These are fragrance compounds. There is a list of, and I've got a cue card for this because I will forget their name. So the European Commission Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety formed an opinion on fragrance allergens in cosmetic products. They identified 127 established and likely contact allergens that come from fragrance ingredients. Now, just to give you, just to set, I suppose, the challenge that we work in, if any one of those 127 listed components exists at a concentration more than 100 parts per million, which we all hear about ppm, we hear about parts per million when we're talking about carbon dioxide. But let me put in context what that means. So across here at UTAS Stadium, which has a capacity of 19,500 people, what we're looking for are 2 football fans in a packed stadium of 19,500 football fans. That's about 100 parts per million. That's if you are using a product like shampoo that you're going to wash off. If you're using maybe a fragrance that is not a wash off, then we need to be able to find any one of those 127 components at 10 parts per million. So that's 2 football supporters in 10 UTAS stadiums. And that's quite an immense challenge. Consumers are the new arbiters of safety and quality. And so that little story that I've told you about shampoo, let's think about that in food. Particularly from the clean label movement, it's really important for us to understand what is in the consumer products and food products that we are consuming, purchasing. The other thing about consumers is that they tend to be, and whether they mean to be or not, oftentimes it's out of their control, but consumers are also very wasteful. And so reading here again from my cue card, every year here in Tasmania, it's estimated that approximately 77,000 tonnes of food goes to waste. There are a few in the room who were at a conference last week in Melbourne, and where we learned in Australia, about 30% of that waste comes from the home. So it's going in the wheelie bin outside and going to landfill. About 77,000 tonnes here in Tas. What does that look like in terms of value? In Australia, it's about $37 billion lost to waste of food, lost to waste. Or coming back to I like to make examples that we can all relate to. I'd like to be able to relate to $37 billion, but I'm not even close. I might have what I say is the best job in the world, but it's not the best paying job in the world. But what that equates to is about 1 in 5 bags of groceries goes in the trash. That's pretty frightening. This is not the first waste crisis that the world has faced. In fact, in 1894, the Times of London, big headline, and I'll read this because this is a direct quote. In 50 years, so this is 1894, in 50 years, every street in London will be buried under 9 feet of horse manure. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? There were 50,000 horses in the city of London. Each of those produces about 10 kilograms of manure a day. That's about, what is that? That's a lot. I've got the New York is a little bit easier to calculate because they got twice as many horses, they make twice as many mess. So every day is like 1 million kilograms of manure every single day. That was a big problem. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, someone invented internal combustion engine and that problem seemed to go away. Why did I tell you that story? Because I'll read you another quote. So Stop Food Waste Australia have on their website this quotation, and it is, "A high-functioning cold chain is essential for reducing food waste and increasing the productivity of Australia's agri-food and fisheries sector." I'll let you think about that for a minute. Because I think that refrigeration is not a growth industry. What do I mean by a growth industry? Refrigeration, in my opinion, is a dead industry. Let's go back to the late 1900s again, when late 1800s, early 1900s, when the automobile started to replace horses. In Massachusetts, there's a city that was, I think it's called Westfield. Its nickname was Whip City, Massachusetts. And back in that time, there were more than 40 buggy whip producers in Whip City, Massachusetts. Nowadays, there are one. And they're not making whips for buggies. They make a few little whips and battens basically for the equestrian competition. And I think refrigeration is a buggy whip. Can we offer a solution, or can we offer an alternative? Can we offer something that perhaps alleviates some of that stress on refrigeration? We hear a lot about carrots. You know, I buy my carrots from the supermarket and it's a big open refrigerator, which is great. In an era of global warming, we've got all that cool air from the refrigerator pumping out into the environment, right? It doesn't work, does it? It doesn't make sense. I like to think that shelf-stable foods, an industry producing shelf-stable foods, is a growth industry. It's a growth industry that is fit for our future. I don't think it's a buggy whip like refrigeration. So what do I mean by shelf-stable foods? I'm going to talk about carrots again. This is great. Everybody knew what I was going to talk about except me. But I'm going to stick with carrots. Carrots, the War on Waste this week, ABC's War on Waste, they were talking about carrots. And carrots have to be perfect size, perfect length. They can't be bent. They can't be 3 legs to go into the main supermarket chains. But I know I don't. How many of us sit down to dinner with whole carrots on the plate? I don't know that anybody does that, seriously. So do we need to buy whole carrots? What if we could buy canned carrots? Now, I was expecting a bigger reaction than that. Because it's not our first preference, is it? Right? Tin of carrots. A tin of carrots is going to last a long, long time. You don't need to put a tin of carrots in the fridge. What's the problem with tinned carrots? They taste bad. Yeah? They're awful. Right? Open the tin, you've got soft, overcooked carrots. They taste bad. If they taste like anything at all, they're salty. Why are they salty? But a lot of people will say first reason to put the salt in there is to protect from bugs. The heat does a really good job of killing off the bugs. The salt is put there because without the salt, the carrots taste like nothing. Most of the nutrition is lost through the heating process that is required to preserve those carrots. So it's not really a great solution. But if there were a way to sterilize those carrots faster, so we bring them to the required temperature to kill the bugs, but not in that long temperature regime required for canning, that's an opportunity. And there are existing and emerging technologies that enable exactly that. And so through the Centre for Food Innovation, which is collaboration between Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture, the Department of Defence, DSTG Group, DSTG, and CSIRO, we are working on an approach which is called microwave-assisted thermal sterilisation. Now, a lot of people probably have a microwave. We've got a crazy microwave. I mean, it is like a microwave that you have never seen. It doesn't even work like a microwave that we have at home. It works on a completely different frequency. System at home is 2.5 gigahertz, and it heats up water, and then eventually, water molecules inside get a little bit excited, just like Rob does here on stage, and everything warms up a little bit. Our system is completely different. It's heating the food, but the important thing is that we can reach those temperatures very, very rapidly that are required to kill the bugs. I think this is a great value proposition, and we're doing a lot of work to really validate that value proposition. And really, I'll finish here. I suppose, big, hairy, ambitious goal is that Tasmania has a thriving, resilient, and innovative food industry. We know that our producers do a marvelous job. They care for what they do. They do it carefully. It's such a shame that what comes out of the ground or what walks on the ground might end up in the waste. It's just such a shame. The Food Industry Australia talks about by 2030, there's a $200 billion opportunity in the food innovation space. And I really hope that the work that we are doing here in the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture and with our partners will help our wonderful state tap a good chunk of those $200 billion. Now, just one word of warning, and that's fake food, because we generate this wonderful brand Tasmania, and we're making the best, and we're making food that's going to last forever on the shelf. Perhaps not forever, but certainly better than having to keep in the fridge. Who said they threw out carrots? Don.
Trust me.
Let's not have to throw out carrots anymore, because we can make them shelf stable. And so that's where the chemist up the front comes back in and says, well, we can help with that too. We have actually right now a wonderful project running to develop methodologies and workflows to prove, if you like, what the food is that we are purchasing, but also the provenance of that food. And we're hoping that this work will continue and will be able to help us really secure that wonderful brand Tasmania that we hope is the brand that the world will be their first choice. Thank you, Dom.
Thanks, Rob. I was just remembering, it just had a blast from the past, a very scary blast from the past about, so noting, obviously I'm not a native Tasmanian. I was called local about 2 years ago, having lived here for 32 years. But I remember growing up as a child, in Ireland, and my mother produced powdered potato. And if carrots taste like nothing, powdered potato to an Irish child tastes like somebody's ground up cardboard and put a bit of water on it. So she never did it again, thanks. I love my mother did it. It was 5 kids she was feeding. So thanks all of our panel. I've got an online question. How can farmers and food processors access this new technology? And that's an anonymous question.
That's a very good question, Anonymous. Right now, it's not really something that's accessible. Very soon, we hope it is something that is accessible. We are, you got to imagine, if you saw this microwave, it's the strangest looking thing you've ever seen.
Can you get us a picture of the microwave?
I know. Let's see if we can find a picture of that. There is.
I'm picturing a TARDIS.
It's not unlike, yeah. I think our microwave system would withstand. It's probably, if you could climb inside there, you might be able to go and see the Titanic. Seriously, it is a beast. So we have, it's unique in the Southern Hemisphere, a pilot scale plant. And so we're doing all of the development on that pilot plant with aim to scale up. So right now, not quite there, but we would hope within the next couple of years, it's a short horizon.
It's interesting when you hear scientists talking about their toys. They get so excited. We got really, really excited about having an in-vessel composter. It's just the joys of life that we have. Roger, you had a question.
Yes, Roger Stanley. It could be a general question, but Theresa, I'll put this one at you first. You talked a lot about the work and you're really excited about that, but what's your measures of success in terms of for the environment, for the farmer, for the consumer? How do you measure success?
Thanks for that question. It's been tricky to decide what to measure. Just in my PhD project, you might be asking a slightly broader question, or both. The catch about soil ecology is that it's quite opaque and difficult to study. And so you can go down what is a quite expensive route of DNA analysis and find out everything that's in the microbiological community. But then what does that really tell you? And I personally am more attracted to more zoomed out measures. So one of the things I measure is the mesofauna as an example. So these are you might have seen a couple of images of them in my slideshow. The mites and collembolans that live in the pore spaces of the soil. So they can't move soil like an earthworm can. They're completely dependent on existing soil structure. So I use them as an indicator of soil porosity. And soil porosity is a good measure because it's strongly influential over things like water infiltration, water storage, plant available water, the resistance to erosion, those kind of measures that are really critical for soil health. So you say soil health, what does it mean? There's so much in it. You just have to, if you're putting together a project, you just have to pick a few things. I guess another aspect of that answer is that if I can support the growers that I really admire by this little bit of academic backup to their practices that they're already experimenting with, and that would also be a measure of success for me, as I probably alluded to.
Rob, could we have that same answer from you? You described what you're doing, but what would you consider success?
Look, I would echo Theresa's comments completely. I think sometimes we get, and I am excited about the microwave, but we get really excited about the next thing, particularly in Australia, when there's some really amazing things already happening. And my ears prick up every time I hear erosion, and that's something that we as a farming group don't spend enough time on. And it's not rocket science. It's really, it's about keeping our topsoil in place in the paddock. And there's some really, really basic things that we can do to protect that. Things like putting rip lines through the paddock, growing cover crops at the right time, having drains so that when we've got large roads that pass by the farm, that we're not washing our topsoil into the creek, because we all only exist because there's a couple of inches of topsoil and the fact that it rains every now and again. That's it. Nothing will do it. So, to protect that, and I guess coming back to the waste argument as well, and even more broadly to what's the consumer's responsibility in that conversation, government has to lead some of that. We're not asking people to grab the rotten tomato off the shelf to prove to the supermarket chains that we'll eat anything. But can we mandate that every broccoli head is taken from the paddock? That's simple. And that any size can go into the microwave then too.
Just a comment, it's actually an early comment early on in the game. It says there from David online, it says what goes around comes around again. My maternal grandfather used to grow oats and veggies to make silage of. I was really interested in red clover and the use of herbs and older grasses such as timothy, good for a wet season and heavy clay, and cocksfoot in a diverse pasture, meeting some of the essential parts of a cow's diet. I come from a dairy farming background. It was just a statement. I thought it was lovely that it's, we're putting a scientific twist on what was normal practice. Any other questions, please?
Jane Haley. Two questions, actually. One to Theresa. What are the critters in your slides? I was really curious.
So there was one that was a collembolan. They are the most spectacular amongst the creatures that I extract. So most of them are pretty colourless little drab bugs. But those two that I had in the slide, I was like, oh, I'm putting them straight in the slideshow. So one is a collembolan, so that they're sometimes called springtails. And they are a group of animals called the mesofauna that are not the microbiology and not the macrobiology, say an earthworm, something like that. So they're this in-between group that's quite interesting. And the other one is a mite. So the order is called Acari. And they are literally everywhere. Anywhere where there's any kind of soil or substrate that's slightly porous, you will find these guys. So they're a really interesting group to study and to use to count or to use as a data source. What was your second question?
Thank you. My second question probably is more to Robert, which is to do with what can we do to resolve what I see as being a bit of a tension between the people who can, and I'm familiar with Penguin Pantry, so who value and are capable of paying that extra dollar for something that is ethically grown and environmentally sustainably delivered to me to take home to my kitchen, and people who have no choice but to shop at No Frills where they've got highly processed food, partially because it's what they know, but also mostly because it's what they can afford. So what can we do to bring the one closer to the other, I suppose?
Yeah, for sure. And look, we'll lead with saying absolutely not qualified in this field at all. And I was reflecting on this walking over here actually in the reading the preamble that Dom ran through, and we've got people here from incredible science backgrounds. I'll say I'm speaking from an industry background, but the third pillar there was society, and I think it would be really interesting to hear someone who's, I guess, very well read in that area. But for us, we absolutely understand that if you're hungry, sustainability environment does not matter. For sure. And really fortunate to not know the price of carrots. When I want to buy a carrot, I go and buy a carrot, and no doubt you're the same. Our focus as a business is that we work with a local community group who work with food insecure individuals in our area, and by extension all of our customers support that program because we have product that is out of spec or not saleable, because if it sat on a shelf it would be passed over. We try and pull that off the shelf and get it to them while it holds value. And many people in our community and the businesses around us, including the big supermarket chains, all support that. So I think it would be really interesting to see how we can move beyond reactivity in that space to proactivity so that you and I can do something meaningful. For me, it's about teaching people the value of food and learning how to grow food. And seeing schools that are including that into the curriculum can really help build a bit more resilience at an earlier point rather than when people are really, really struggling. But it's a huge challenge and certainly something I'd like to learn a lot more about.
Can I add something slightly
Please do.
controversial to that idea? I am an incredibly privileged person, always have been, but I'm on a very low income as a PhD student. And I think there's also a mindset issue. I think where, as you said, Rob, people don't bat an eyelid at paying $5 for a coffee, but they look at the carrot price and they're shocked. And I've made a decision in my life, and please remember that I'm saying this as a very privileged person, that I don't look at the prices and I just go to your shop because I live in Penguin and I love your little shop and I love knowing that I'm buying locally from people that care.
Great advertising.
And that's not where I try and save money in my life. And I do think that Coles and Woolworths, to be explicit, that you were very careful not to say explicitly, have given us this funny mindset about fresh fruit and veg, that's where we have to save the money, not other places in our life. I think it's a bit of a problem.
Quality versus duration of life. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer to go and get fresh veggies. Listen, we're going to round it up there. So could you please join me in thanking Rob, Sam, Robert and Theresa. Stand. The next gig, as we'll call it, because I'm a 60-year-old, please join us on the 16th of August for our next online talk, Connecting for Climate Action in Tasmania, which is, by the way, did I mention that the University of Tasmania is the top university in the world for climate action? We're not talking it was up against 5 universities, it was up about 1,000 universities, so pat yourselves on the back, because you're great, most of you are graduates. This event is a special Science Week session brought to you in collaboration with the Australian Meteorological and Oceanographic Society. Say that with a few beers on you. Join our experts to explore Tasmania's new climate action plan, discuss its community rollout, alignment with global climate change communication strategies, and the active involvement of young people. And you can get that off the QR code, which I believe will miraculously appear on our screen. Yes, it has. This evening's talk will be available soon as a video and podcast via the Island of Ideas website, which you should all know about now on your screens, and find the latest information of our upcoming events on the same webpage. And thanks for being here. coming out on a cold winter's night in Tassie, although my garden's beginning to show some flowers. So I think we're almost at the end. So thank you all, and safe journey home.